Sleepy Z's Masonry Studio welcomes you to Think Big with Michael Zellner, powered by Platinum Jewelers. My guest today for episode 144 for part two of his interview series is Richard Gage, AIA. Richard Gage, AIA, is an architect of over 30 years from San Francisco Bay Area, a member of the American Institute of Architects, and the founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He, along with his courageous wife and assistant Gail, continue to lead the charge towards a real investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11 at richardgage911.org. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher named David Ray Griffin on the radio back in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. The organization he founded, AE 9/11 Truth, now numbers more than 3,500 architects and engineers, demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. As an architect, he has worked on most types of building construction, including numerous fireproof steel frame buildings. Most recently, he worked on the construction documents for a $400 million mixed-use urban project with 1.2 million square feet of retail, parking structure, and mid-rise office space, altogether about 1,200 tons of steel framing. Thanks again for coming back on, Richard.
You're so welcome, Michael. It's awesome to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about the Twin Towers today.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. You know, for anyone who might have missed part one with Richard on my podcast this past June, number one, I suggest you go back and you watch it. That's the first thing. But, you know, I first became familiar with Richard listening to him on a major national podcast. And then I watched his documentary, which I suggest anyone should also go on television and watch too, called 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, that he made back in 2012. You know, I was then determined to have him on the show as my guest so the audience could see or hear this or both, instead of, unfortunately, what most people believe and do, which is the national media narrative, not only on this subject, but on most things today. You know, growing up as a kid and well beyond, I was one of those people that thought everything the national media stations said was the truth. You know, and I was watched people like Dan Rather and, Tom Brokaw and people like that, you know, because you thought, why would they lie to us and spread propaganda to us in the United States? You know, we're supposed to be the good guys here, but my eyes are wide open now more than ever. And this isn't a political statement for anything or anyone. It's just the truth. And most people don't realize how brainwashed they really are and have a hard time facing factual information, even when it's sitting there right in their face. And one of the big reasons for that, I believe, is that then they would have to admit that everything they grew up believing might not be correct, or their egos get so involved that people just decide to stay in their bubble and not open up their minds to something that's completely opposite of what they've always believed. And in part one, Richard did a presentation talking about World Trade Center building number 7 that, quote unquote, collapsed about 8 hours after the Twin Towers were hit by airplanes. Today, he's come back on the show to talk about, for part two, to give us a presentation on talking about the Twin Towers and what truly happened that day. If you rarely or never open up your mind to things that might not have been told for the last 22 years plus, I hope you watch this today and judge for yourself. So at this point, what I am going to do is I'm going to share the screen with Richard. So Richard has a really great presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to you. There you go.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be with you guys. And this is now, we looked at in part one at building 7. And just to review, though, I mean, this is a third tower that collapsed on 9/11, and it drops suddenly, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. So we can intuitively understand that that was a controlled demolition. In fact, here it is, right here, and that building drops at free fall acceleration, indicating that not one of the 80 columns in that building gave any resistance for any of its well, any of its fall for 3 seconds, a third of its 2.5 seconds, a third of its 7-second fall. So we know that's a controlled demolition, and that's where we left off. So now we have to ask ourselves, is it possible that the Twin Towers were explosively demolished as well? Because Building 7 was part of the 9/11 events. It was part of the conspiracy. We can intuitively know or deduce that the terrorists who brought down Building 7 were probably not fanatical Muslims getting access to one of the most highly secure buildings outside the Pentagon and the Twin Towers. It held the IRS, the CIA, the Department of Defense, the Securities and Exchange Commission, where the worst fires were. So the security company was the same for all three buildings too. Building 7 wasn't hit by a plane. It was only about 100 yards from from the North Tower. So let's take a look at the destruction of the towers. We can just see intuitively, seeing their destruction at once here, even though their collapses occurred about 15 minutes apart. But you can see that they're identical, that we have a few small scattered fires, as you'll see, but the collapse is nearly identical in each case, even though we have different sets of damage in the from the planes in each building, from the fires in each building. So let's dig into it. We looked at the model of the features of controlled demolition earlier when we looked at Building 7. We asked ourselves, is there a sudden onset of destruction? Feature number 1. Well, let's look at the South Tower. It's standing just fine, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. So this is a sudden onset of destruction. There's no jolt or hesitation at the beginning of the collapse. Same thing at the South Tower. It's standing still, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. So we can say, okay, that's interesting. There is a sudden onset. How about feature number 2? Are there patterned explosions and flashes of light heard and seen by witnesses? Well, turns out, yeah, there's 186 witnesses, first responder witnesses of explosions, many of which are before the towers came down. It started with just 118 firefighters observed by Professor Graham McQueen, observing flashes, sounds of explosions, and other phenomena of explosive demolition. But he dug deeper into it. Then he found 156. And now, before his untimely death a couple of months ago, Graham found 186 total eyewitnesses of explosions. They sound like this. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. So again and again, you're going to hear this specific order of events where the first responders are describing an explosion, or feeling an explosion, or seeing an explosion before the towers came down. This is extremely important because not only does NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people. Not only do they deny these explosions, though they have interviewed hundreds of witnesses, they missed these 186 first responders, it looks like, but they deny that there were any explosions aside from the original airplane impacts, and a few explosions in the lobby, which they attributed falsely to air fuel mixture falling down the elevators. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. Shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. An explosion appeared at the very top, simultaneously from all four sides. Material shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does it need to be from these professional witnesses, expert witnesses, who were standing? There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the fifth floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a deliberate, synchronized kind of thing. I saw flash, 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 and at the lower level of the building, interestingly. You know, like when they demolish a building, it seemed like on television, they blow up these buildings. It seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. Let's take a look on the right side. What are they talking about? The North Tower. On the left side, a known controlled demolition. Let's slow it down halfway. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, at least in the first 3 seconds. Especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought a steel frame fire protected building down. You ever see professional demolition where they set charges on certain floors and then you hear pop, pop, pop? That's when I heard that friggin' noise. That's when I saw the building coming down. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. You saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. The building was blowing out on all 4 sides. We actually heard the pops. You know, you heard the pops of the building. With each popping sound, it was initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building. And then it would just go all the way around the building on both sides. Let's see what they're talking about with regard to the South Tower on the right. A known controlled demolition on the left. Is there any similarity? Let's slow it down halfway. Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since fire, the official cause of these buildings' collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame fire protected building ever? I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors, and then a series of smaller explosions, which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. And another loud earth-shattering blast with a large fireball that blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, you know, like when they demolish a building, that's what I thought I saw. Did you see any flashes? I said, yes. I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody at that point still thought these things were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? No, I was there when the building exploded. You mean when it fell down? No, when it exploded. Let's listen to these witnesses.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the
planet, probably.
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower.
It just went ba-boom, it was like a bomb went off. And another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
No, the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay. Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
There was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
Then there was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
That the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now that's the first time we're hearing that. So two planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is
a huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us.
It sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, three big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
And we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, Building 2 was collapsing.
At that point, we heard a large boom. You know, I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it, came down.
All of a sudden you hear explosion, and you could see the building starting to collapse.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, though we are told, collapsed because of a third explosion.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's the One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the Second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions.
And then you heard from far away, boom, boom.
And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
From the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits. And as the bombs were going, people just started running. And I sat there and watched a few of them explode. And it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
How many of those witnesses do you imagine were interviewed by NIST? Don't know. How many do you think NIST included in their final report? 0. Not one of them.
We started one.
It's incredible. The NIST says, well, the upper part of the building drove the rest of the building down to the ground, and then it destroyed itself. Well, not only does that defy Newton's third law of motion, because there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide based on their mass. The mass of the upper part could not possibly, which is very light, by the way, it's a virtual pyramid, drive the rest of the building down to the ground. It's physically impossible. In fact, when a Volkswagen runs into a Mack truck, what happens? The Volkswagen gets crushed, right? We all know that. What does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The upper part, the upper lighter, weaker part cannot possibly destroy the heavier, cold, hard, intact steel below. The lightest is at the top. This is a column profile at the top. It gets heavier and heavier and bigger as we go down until halfway down they're 2 inches thick, 30 inches by 16 inches, and heavier and heavier and heavier until it's almost solid steel, 52 inches by 22 inches. Each of these massive core columns, 47 of them in number. And similar to the perimeter columns, they get heavier and heavier as you go down. And let's see what's happening with the upper part. Is it destroying the lower part? I'll make it easier for you. Let's zoom in and look at the lower red line. It doesn't go down for the first couple of seconds. The upper green line is going down, but the lower red line is not going down, meaning the upper part's not crushing the lower part. It is being destroyed itself, just like the Volkswagen would be. In fact, if it were there, we'd see it. None of the photos, none of the videos show an upper part of the building crushing the lower part. If it were there, it would have crushed these dozen or so few remaining core columns 6 seconds after the building. It would have crushed them also, but of course it didn't. So let's see a feature number 3. Is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? Well, almost. The cell tower begins to actually fall over. But even though we have asymmetrical damage from that tower on the structure below and asymmetrical damage from the airplane impacts and the fires, look and ask yourself, why do we see complete symmetrical damage all the way down all 4 sides of the building? What is causing that damage? In fact, let's zoom in and you can tell me. We've got what I see is dozens of explosions in this looped video. You can see each one of them individually. Clearly. So these are individual explosions, right, Mike?
Yes, sir.
It doesn't get much more clear than this. This is not a big nuclear weapon taking out the Twin Towers. This is not energy weapons against the towers. These are explosions, big explosions if you're there, but a series of relatively small explosions taking out each of these exterior columns. Feature number 4, do we have isolated explosive ejections called squibs? Well, take a look in this film clip by Loose Change, Dylan Avery. We have 20 stories down below the zone of destruction, 40 stories, even 60 stories down below. We have these isolated explosive ejections. In fact, on the left side here of this looped video of the South Tower, which is beginning to fall over to the right, we can see on the left side a dozen explosions individually at all levels, all at once, just taking out the structure in this building. It is very, very clear. How fast is the building coming down? Feature number 5 in controlled demolitions. We have on the left a video, on the right an animation showing you how fast this sucker is falling. Here's 8 seconds, 9 seconds. In about a dozen seconds, the entire building, both of them, has been completely shattered, and it falls as clocked by physicists here.
We are here tracking the motion of the roofline at 0.2 second intervals through approximately 32 meters or 8 stories. This graph shows the height of the roofline as a function of time. The analysis is simpler if we plot velocity as a function of time. On this kind of a graph, a straight line indicates constant acceleration. First note that there is a sudden onset of collapse, as the point we are tracking makes a sudden transition from being at rest to an approximately constant downward acceleration. The slope of the graph indicates that the acceleration is 6.31 meters per second squared downward, which is 64% of free fall.
Pretty incredible. So it's getting faster and faster, almost as fast as free fall, down through what? 80,000 tons beneath the point of jet plane impacts of structural steel that's 3 to 5 times stronger than it needed to be to hold this load up for the life of the building. So how it's not even slowing down when it meets this incredible resistance. So how does that happen? It can only happen if you remove those columns. How is that done? Through explosions, which we're looking at the evidence of course. Does it even look like a gravitational collapse? Or does it look more like a volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea in 2009 with upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying molten objects trailed by thick white smoke clouds? We'll come back to that later. Now we also have the next feature of controlled demolition, number 6, the total shattering of the structural steel frame. Because the National Fire Protection Association Guide 921 for fire and explosion investigations points out that you need to be looking for shrapnel effects when you're doing an investigation to find out if there were explosions. Well, yes, look for high order damage characterized by what? Shattering of the structure, producing small pulverized debris with the building completely demolished and debris thrown great distances. And indeed, that's what we have. The building is shattered, say all the way down to the ground, save these remaining shards, if you will, of perimeter structural steel section rising about 60 feet in the air. But the steel frame is completely shattered all across lower Manhattan, broken down these core columns into their original 37.5-foot lengths, ready for loading and shipment. Let me make a note. And we also seem to have the lateral ejection, which is a unique feature of controlled demolition. You normally don't want to blow pieces in pressure wave effects, according to the National Fire Protection Association, all across landing into other buildings. Heavy structural steel pieces freely flying, impaling themselves in the World Financial Center and other skyscrapers, and destroying the Winter Gardens 500 feet away.
Are you shopping for a new watch, an engagement ring, any kind of jewelry at all? What's up, Memphis? This is Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Grizzlies, encouraging you all to shop where I shop, Platinum Jewelers here in Memphis. Platinum Jewelers has a big selection of earrings, stockable rings, luxury watches, necklaces, bracelets, really whenever you need. 9387 Poplar next to Fresh Market in Germantown. So if you need anything jewelry related, go to my spot, Platinum Jewelers.
And with these laterally freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, freely flying. This is not like a banana peeling like we're told by the debunkers. Look at this one. Forward 2, back 2. That is freely flying, and it starts out horizontally. Well, wait a minute. How does gravity work? Down. What's going on here? Out. So we've got a real problem with the physics of the official narrative here, which says that this is a gravity-driven collapse, but something has hurled this 4-ton structural steel section, and it's about to hit Building 7. And Building 7, which we looked at in part 1 of the series, got hit pretty bad. But that wasn't even a causal factor, according to NIST, a significant cause of that building's collapse. By the way, if 100,000 tons of steel framing is distributed outside the footprint of the towers, well outside, 600 feet radius all around, 1,400-foot diameter. What's crushing the building? Because they're not available to crush the building underneath them, right? If they're flying out and landing all around, well, that weight was used in the calculations to prove that this is a gravitational collapse, that the top part crushed the lower part. Can't do it, can it? More than 95% of the structure is distributed in a 1,400-foot diameter. Maybe it was a concrete. Because there were 110 floors, each an acre in size, 4 to 8 inches thick in this building. We would be looking for them. On the left, we don't see them. We see a miscellaneous pile, 4, 6 stories tall. On the right, we see a pile of concrete. And that is from an actual gravitational collapse in Mexico. We see pancakes. No pancakes at the Twin Towers. In fact, we're missing an awful lot of concrete. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. Before it's pulverized in midair. And all the photos and all the videos show that the concrete is distributed after being pulverized to 100 micron particles, 90,000 tons of concrete distributed across lower Manhattan in a 3-inch thick blanket. That's where the concrete is. 90,000 tons of it. By the way, if that's where it is, what's crushing the building? I mean, we're talking about not the steel. It's outside, well outside the footprint, 95% of it. All the concrete, almost 99% of it, is outside the footprint. So it's not available either to crush the steel. That's 3/4 of the weight of the building, completely unavailable to crush the building. And yet NIST's engineers and other engineers use all of that weight to try to prove to us that's how the building was crushed. They're lying. It's fraudulent. There's another witness that gives us clue, though, and that is the seismic recordings from the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, 20 miles north of the World Trade Center. What did they record? Because FEMA and NIST relied on these reports. Well, let's look at the reports. We have the first, in fact, there were seismic indicators picked up when the buildings collapsed. The South Tower gave us a 2.1 magnitude event when it collapsed. The North Tower gave us a 2.3 magnitude event when it collapsed. This was near the time of the collapse. So NIST says, well, this is because of the collapse. But guess what? The data shows us otherwise. Let's look at it. The actual collapse at the surface waves reach Lamont Doherty at 10:28 and 31 seconds. The tower starts collapsing 9 seconds before that. And a second later, the first debris hits the ground, and then the actual heavier debris doesn't hit the ground until another 4 seconds. So how can the signal, the 2.3 magnitude signal, be caused by the debris if it really doesn't hit till 5 seconds later? Well, NIST has an answer for this. They go to Columbia University and they get them to move their data back 3 seconds, which gives them that fudge factor. Now, they won't release this report And we don't know what deal was made between NIST and Columbia University. It's a black box, but we've got some clues here. Let's look at the data carefully. Do you see these P waves and S waves completely ignored by NIST, ignored by LDEO? Very well formed, though, above background seismic noise level. What could have produced those? Well, let's find out. 4 seconds before the tower starts its descent, we've got indicators of what really was causing those. In fact, it looks like they're explosions, which are picked up 6 and 10 seconds earlier. So it turns out they were picked up on a camera mounted on a tripod, several cameras actually. In the case of the North Tower, we've got cameras on tripods already because the towers haven't come down yet. So the news stations were there ready to watch this. So it's still right now. There's a shake. I didn't shake that. That was the ground shaking the camera. This report is, and research was done by Professor Graham McQueen, did the earth shake before the South and the North Tower hit the ground. Here's the North Tower again. It's still, and then you see the shake right there. And this camera is on top of a roof or a balcony. And then there's explosions that go off, and then you see the towers coming down. So, and this occurs also, by the way, in the South Tower, where we have a 2.1 magnitude event. And at 9:59 in the morning and 04 seconds, we have the start of the seismic event. Okay. And then, but the tower starts collapsing actually before that. So far, so good for the official narrative. But again, the first debris doesn't even strike the pavement. Remember, NIST is banking and telling you that the debris striking the pavement is what caused the signal. But that happens 7 seconds later. What is NIST going to do with this discrepancy? Oh, don't worry, they've got a plan. They contract privately with Columbia University. We don't get the report, and it moves the whole set of incidences back 3 seconds, which gets them within their fudge factor tolerance, I suppose. What could have caused that? That signal? Well, the first signal, as you can see here, the noise level is very low, and then we have a not as well defined P wave, but it's still defined. And let's see what might have created it, and might have also caused the first support the first responders in their witness of explosions before the tower came down. So let's just go to New York camera 1 in the case of, oops, do we have that? Oh, well, I'll have to show that to you later. 304, missing video. So, but that's the primary work of piece of work from Graham McQueen, which is incredibly important work and backs up altogether the first responders' eyewitness accounts of explosions before the tower came down. Well, let's look at the data from the FEMA and the NIST reports. For instance, the NIST report produced in 2002. What were their objectives? This is a $20 million effort they had, so it's very serious. They were to determine why and how World Trade Center 1 and 2 collapsed. Okay, did they do that? They produced 10,000 pages, 42 sub-reports, 1,000 pages modeling the airplanes, 100 pages fire modeling, but only 1/2 of a page on the events following collapse initiation. In other words, the actual collapse. Let's look at that. But they had a secret objective, though. First, what was their objective? They said, well, the focus of our investigation was on the sequence of events from the instant of aircraft impact to the initiation of collapse. What? You didn't go past the initiation of collapse and examine how the building behaved? Doesn't actually include the structural behavior of the tower after the conditions for collapse initiation were reached. Wait, you had $20 million. This is not rocket science to figure out how the upper part of a building is going to be resisted by the cold, hard, intact steel below the fires, the plane impacts. Well, one second. This should have been called the final report on the initiation of collapse. They were tasked by Congress to explain how it collapsed, not how the initiation of collapse came. What do the experts say? We have many who have signed the petition demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers. In fact, 3,600 architects have signed this petition. You can see it at our website, richardgage911.org. William Rice. The prevailing theory would have us believe that each of the Twin Towers inexplicably collapsed upon itself, crushing all 287 massive columns on each floor, while maintaining a near free fall acceleration, as if the 80,000 or more tons of supporting structural steel framework underneath didn't exist. David Scott, structural engineer, near free fall collapse violates laws of physics. Very clear, right? You can memorize that one. Scott Granger, fire protection engineer. All 3 collapses were very uniform in nature. Natural collapses due to unplanned events are not uniform. Did they preserve the evidence? This is really important. Listen to this structural engineer, Abulhassan Nastani Azel, who had unlimited access to study this deal with a National Science Foundation grant. What was his experience there?
After 9/11, we realized that Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has sent all the steel that we need to study. That's why I'm here to study steel. Has sent all the steel to recycling plant to go to China for recycling. For what? For 15 cents a pound. Just nothing. And all the evidence of steel went to melting pot.
All the evidence of the steel went to the melting pot, to China, for recycling, before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper forensic investigation, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately, but it didn't. In fact, in easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history, we have 400 truckloads a day lined up, ready to haul this debris to the barge and put out to sea to China. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene. So we've got to look at the evidence of what could have really been responsible for all of this massive destruction. And when we come back for part 3 in this series, we will dive headfirst into massive temperatures that were not only haunting, but keeping the workers from doing their job, 2,000-degree temperatures. We'll be looking at witnesses of steel flowing. We'll be looking at the scientific and physical facts of how hot this molten material actually is, and the melted concrete in the police museum. We'll be looking at the causative factors of thermite, which is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. We're looking at the forensic evidence of that, which is ignited thermite. We'll also be looking at the evidence of unignited thermite. So I can't wait to bring this to your attention in part 3, because we have a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, who actually finds in all the World Trade Center dust samples red-gray chips of nanothermite, very high-tech material. This is not something that you should be found at all in the World Trade Center aftermath in the dust. This can only be evidence of unignited thermite, and we show that very clearly. So that's what we're going to be bringing to your attention in part 3, and I'll be honored to do just that.
Awesome. I remember that day. Obviously, everybody, with a certain age remembers it well, Richard. I'm going to unshare it here so we can get back on screen. Not sure if it'll take us back or all the way or not. I just put it back to where we could both, so maybe you could get it. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
I remember when, I forgot who it was that, George W. Bush, president at the time, was in that classroom in Florida, reading, I think, to those young kids. And someone came and whispered in his ear and told him. Well, obviously, people at the highest levels of our government knew. And my thought, in my opinion, and I wanted just to get your thoughts on this, is if he really thought, if he didn't know about it, I mean, I know the excuse I think they said was they didn't want to startle the kids and everything like that. And, I mean, come on, if this was something that they really thought, I mean, it would have been like, sorry, have to go. Obviously, all these kids were going to hear about this anyway. But he just sat there for a few minutes with that, I remember that dumbish look on his face.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, do you think not only obviously the president and all the people in the cabinet, do you think that the money spent people in Congress knew about it, and that report was just something they had to do for the public just to show that they were doing it? Or what is your thought on that?
Well, yeah, an investigation was required and it is necessary. But what we've shown today, and in part 3 also, is that the investigation was completely corrupted by individuals who were responsive to the Bush administration at the time through the Department of Commerce, an agency of the executive branch, whose leadership was changed when Bush came into power, and the leadership of the NIST organization changed as well. And Shyam Sunder of NIST was brought in to lead that corrupt investigation.
And then you see all those videos you showed of all the media at the time. You know, they were talking, they had interviewing many people, including some of the media people themselves said that they heard the boom, boom, boom. And then that whole narrative seemed to disappear within just a few days, that you didn't hear about that anymore. I mean, it's like it was, they were quote unquote gotten to and told, you better shut up.
Right. Well, there were 36 reporters on the ground on 9/11 reporting exactly what you're talking about, explosions, and reporting this as an explosion-based event, not a collapse by fire and broken columns from the airplanes, because many of them were direct witnesses of those explosions occurring even at ground level.
Right.
The whole narrative got turned around and repackaged when the national media came in. And how does that happen? The national media is owned by just 5 corporations. Well, who runs the boards of who's on the board of directors of those 5 corporations? It turns out to be the same people that are on the boards of directors in the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, all of whom are operating together in lockstep to bring us an official narrative and to shape and manipulate public opinion through propaganda.
Didn't Donald Rumsfeld give a speech like maybe the day before about like trillions of lost money that they could not account for? And something happened with that too, that wherever those records were destroyed the next day.
Yeah. It was the day before. He said, we can't account for $2.3 trillion. And the next day, 9/11 happens. And where was the Pentagon hit by whatever hit it? First, we all agree that there's a new investigation that is needed at the Pentagon. None of us agree that Hani Hanjour, who failed Cessna flying school, could have flown this civilian aircraft in a 330-degree corkscrew pattern, descending 8,000 feet per minute, and then coming in and hitting where? Not Donald Rumsfeld's office, not the high brass. No, it was the Naval Intelligence Office, which was tasked with finding that $2.3 trillion. It's incredible, this story.
My last question today is, obviously you and Gail have been very loud voices all over the country talking about the evidence you've shown us today and back in June, and then are going to show us again. The skepticism people have. I'm sure you've been asked every question there is about this from people who think they know more than you, or they just want you to shut up. What do you say to those people that are skeptical and, think they know it all?
Well, you can't open the mind by force of somebody who won't look at evidence. I've been very careful to present this evidence in a way that the most skeptical people can review if they have half of an open mind and they're actually looking at it. That's the good news. We have 3,600 architects and engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation into this evidence. And, what are they all conspiracy theorists?
Right.
I mean, at some point you got to just say, okay, I'm willing to look at this stuff. And once they do, guess what? They raise their hands saying, yeah, we need a new investigation, because guess what? I have done this presentation now with my wife, Gail. We are all over the country giving this presentation to all kinds of different groups. And we ask people, how many of you at the end of this think we need a new investigation? Virtually all the hands go up. Most of the time, all the hands go up. And sometimes we're missing a couple of people who say, I'm not quite sure. And there's one or two out there sometimes will say, I believe the official story. Sure. So that's the ratios.
Yeah, I think I remember in the documentary from 2012, there was a psychologist or psychiatrist at the end that you had on there that was explaining about how it's hard for people, when they believe, just like I talked about at the beginning, when you believe something for so long, it's hard to let your ego think of something. Well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe they told me wrong. Maybe they're lying to us.
It's hard. Mark Twain said, it's a whole lot easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. Now, that is wise. We've all been fooled. I was fooled until 2006, when I was just shocked to hear this information on the radio. Bonnie Faulkner was interviewing David Ray Griffin, and I'm going, what am I listening to? Because I hadn't heard a shred of 9/11 truth anywhere, or an alternative theory as to how the towers came down. All of a sudden, I'm listening to this elderly gentleman talking about this evidence that we've been showing today and a lot more. And I could just feel my world turning upside down. Because if this were true, then up would be down and down would be up. It would single-handedly prove that our country has been hijacked. Really, if the Bush administration could get away with this, or rogue elements in the Defense Department, and certainly in the Bush administration, as David Ray Griffin proves in his books, and the media, all telling this incredible story, and the Congress backing it up and sending our troops to murder 2 million Afghanis and Iraqis, stealing the opium trade from the Taliban and stealing the oil from Iraq. That's what it seems to be all about. Because, that's bad. I was shocked, literally shocked, to just come to grips with the enormity of this conspiracy. I can't imagine that it'd be true. And then we have the Project for a New American Century, which a year earlier or more had established their long-term goals. This neocon think tank actually placed their goals: regional hegemony in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, et cetera, Syria, and even Iran, which is in jeopardy today as this Gaza-Israel war widens before our eyes through massive provocations on the part of Israel. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I got to finish this thought.
That's okay.
Project for a New American Century was, they also wanted not just a regional hegemony in the Middle East, but a massive increase in the Pentagon budget. And they got all of that. How did they get that? Because those signers were brought in with Bush in the Bush administration to run these operations and these wars.
Well, thank you again for coming on. I look forward to having you back on for part 3 sometime soon. And we appreciate everybody listening. And once again, thanks to our sponsor for Think Big with Michael Zellner, Platinum Jewelers. And everybody have a great day. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Michael.
Appreciate your time.